You're listening to the MurphologyPodcast. Thanks for tuning in to the MurphologyPodcast. AKA Murph here to share interviews about biking experiences from bicyclists who have pedaled to places all over the U.S. Each week, we will get to know new people and explore new destinations to ride your bike. As you listen to these adventures, you may wonder, why haven't I done that yet? All right, well, on the show today is Fred Zelt. Hey, Fred, how are you doing today?
Okay, how are you, Kathy?
Good, really good. So I guess I should say we're recording this, on April Fool's Day. I hope you're not going to trick me with anything.
No,
Okay.
it seems like March 32nd.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's 2020 and it's crazy times as far as the coronavirus, the COVID-19. And so I'm assuming that is why Fred created a Facebook page, which we're going to get into in a second. But Fred, you created this great new Facebook page with, last time I checked, it was over 3,000 members. And it seems to be exactly what cyclists need right now, so I wanted to get you on the show. So it's called the Social Distance Cycling Club, and I want to kind of hear a little bit about that in a second. But first, let's find out a little bit about you. Give us a highlight of where you live right now and what cycling used to be like.
Well, I live in Pittsburgh. I grew up here and went away to college and then worked. So I was away for more than 30 years, moved back here almost 5 years ago as a retiree. And the place I chose to live, it's up on a hill. This is a plateau that's cut into with rivers and streams. They're typically 400 feet high, the hills top to bottom. So I live at the top of a hill. I can take a funicular with my bike, an inclined plane that's public transportation down to bike paths along the rivers. So there are great flat bike paths along the rivers. There's a network of those and more coming all the time. You can cycle from here to DC on bike paths.
Oh, wow.
Or if you're more adventuresome, there are these hills. There's a Dirty Dozen event every fall where it's kind of a race up 13 of the steepest hills they could find. I think one of them's 37%.
30, what?
So,
really?
Yeah.
Oh,
And there's mountain biking too. I haven't gotten into that, but I've been interested in that lately, using these hillsides and woods that are abundant here for mountain bike paths. So, there's road cycling in the countryside. There are rail trails out there too. There are flat paths along the rivers. There's urban city cycling, all of that here.
Nice. You've got a little bit of everything, it sounds like.
Yeah.
And gravel riding is getting to be a really important part of people's cycling lives. Do you have gravel there as well?
Yeah, I have friends who do that. I haven't gotten into that myself, but they found places that are good for that, and from what I see and hear, it looks really good. I've got to try that.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't really think of the rail trails as being gravel rides in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
They go on gravel roads. The gravel trails here, like the Gap Trail, it's fine crushed limestone. It's really well maintained by volunteer groups. In the summertime, if it hasn't been raining, you could ride a bike with 23 with tires on that, no problem.
Oh, nice.
So they're not, I don't really think of those as gravel rides.
Yeah. I've interviewed quite a few people on this podcast that have experienced the Gap Trail, and I've heard nothing but great, great, great things, and it's on my bucket list.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that you're retired, and from what I read, you are a retired geologist. Is that correct?
Yep. I took my first geology class in high school here. I was fascinated by the idea of exploring and seeing things that no one's ever seen before, split open a rock and be the first one to see that particular fossil.
Oh, sure.
So I studied it in college and grad school. I ended up in the oil and gas industry. I worked for Exxon and then ExxonMobil for 30 years and had that experience many times there of being the first one to see a subsurface seismic data set and try to understand what was there and whether there could be oil or gas there that no one has imagined before. And if you think it's possible, then convince people that it actually could be there. And sometimes it works out, gets drilled, and it's a discovery. So all of that was a lot of fun for me for a long time. I worked for them for 30 years.
Oh, yeah, that sounds very interesting. We have a bike ride in Iowa called Ragbri, and it's a 7-day tour. And I think it was last year or the year before we went through Geode State Park. And
Hmm.
so there was a guy there that I'm assuming was a geologist, or at least was a fan of geology, and he was cracking open rocks. And it was amazing to pop those open and see the geodes. And I ended up with like probably more rocks that I needed to have on my bike the rest of that day, but it was just so exciting to see it.
Yeah, last year here, I offered just a 1 day excursion that combined talking about the geology and why the landscapes are the way they are, why the hills and valleys are the shapes they are, with a bike ride. And I think 150 people expressed interest. I really didn't want more than 16 or 18.
Oh,
And
man.
that's the kind of thing I'm looking forward to doing more of in the future.
Yeah.
When I've been on the cross country rides, I didn't do this so much the first time, but after that, I love to give people a talk about satellite images of the landforms and how that relates to the geology. It's one of my favorite things about geology is helping people understand why the landscapes around them are shaped the way they are, that there's an underlying reason.
Mm. Wow, we could have a whole different podcast on this because I would ask silly questions like, how did the Grand Canyon become how big it
Yeah.
is? That would be
Oh,
great.
it's got a great story and it's not as simple as you might think.
Well, so then it's safe to assume that you're an outdoorsy kind of guy.
Yeah, a lot of geologists get into that field because they love the outdoors. And again, for me, it was also a sense of exploration and discovery.
And as far as, we mentioned the Gap Trail and some of the places around your home, but are there any specific, like, great places to ride in your area?
Well, the part of the Gap Trail that I love the most is from Ohio State Park to Connellsville. It's a downhill. It's going toward Pittsburgh, but it's in the upland area. And Ohio State Park, there's whitewater there, the Youghiogheny River,
Mm.
and you follow along the Youghiogheny River down the mountain. So you're on a hillside. You can hear the river below you. You can see it in places. It's one of these west-facing high areas, kind of like the Western Adirondacks. Also, the Laurel Highlands, where I'm describing, gets a lot of lake effect rainfall. And because westerly winds, the water air is rising, cools off, and there's a lot of rainfall there. So
Mm-hmm.
it's just lush with ferns and trees, and it's just a really gorgeous ride.
Nice.
That's an especially nice segment.
And if you said it's all downhill, do you turn around and go back up or do you get a ride back?
Well, with me, I've done it as part of one-way rides
Mm-hmm.
in the past, kind of on the way to Pittsburgh. But there are lots of services. If you wanted to, you'd be able to find a ride to get back.
Nice. Well, let's get into this Facebook page that you created. It's called the Social Distance Cycling Club. And I guess that times like right now that we're experiencing, it's pretty obvious what Social Distance Cycling Club means. But why don't you get into like what inspired you to start this particular Facebook page?
Well, for me, things changed a lot on March 10th.
Mm-hmm.
That was the day I really realized things were going to be different, and had a couple events planned. One of them, together with cycling apparel manufacturer Aerotech Designs, who are here near Pittsburgh, we'd partnered on putting together a Pittsburgh Bike Film Festival for Sunday, March 22nd. And on the 10th is when I realized, for other reasons too than the coronavirus, that this just wasn't going to happen.
Oh, yeah.
The theater was bought by a management company, and it wasn't certain to be open even in the best of circumstances by the 22nd at that point. So we knew that went away, and I had more time because of that going away. I planned to leave Pittsburgh on April 10th for a 6-month bike ride,
Oh, wow.
and I had some preparation to do for that too, but that all went away as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of had more time, and I was feeling sort of frustrated. I was expecting this community cycling event and the Bike Film Festival to happen. And so I'd been thinking about online events and just thought I would experiment with this group. When I first made it, it's a little more than 2 weeks ago now, I kind of hoped it would only be needed for a few weeks.
Oh, yes.
Because, we didn't know as much then as we do now about the duration of all this.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, when it got a few hundred people, I was pretty surprised. And now today, I think it's over 3,700.
Wow.
And it seems to get a couple hundred more every day.
Yeah.
And it's really not everyone who's in it engages, really, but there are plenty of people who do engage. I looked at the metrics, and it's more than 70,000 posts, comments, and likes right now.
That's amazing. What do you think the reason is for the popularity?
Well, I think like me, there are a lot of cyclists who would like to be out riding more than we safely can right now.
Mm-hmm.
And we're used to being in groups too. A lot of people cycle in groups on the weekends. Not everyone. A lot of people, some people do like cycling by themselves exclusively, but lots of us like cycling together too. And it's kind of a group of common interest to encourage each other right now and see what we're doing. And it's been great seeing all these different places. There are places I've seen on this now I didn't know existed before that now I want to go see. There are rail trails in different places. Even in the area where I live, here near Pittsburgh, I've seen a particular trail I didn't even know existed along
Mm-hmm.
a river.
Yeah.
And you mentioned, I guess you're from Iowa.
Yes, I'm from Iowa.
It seems like half the people in the group are from Iowa.
Yeah.
Over the weekend, it seemed like half the posts showed the High Trestle Bridge.
Yep. Yep. Which I'm assuming a lot of people, because I did see some of the comments on that bridge, which is, a really cool place to go. How many people were commenting like, whoa, 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 I guess I'm going to have to come to Iowa once this is all over. Like you mentioned, there are some really cool photos that are popping up on the site. And I need to probably start making a little list of places I want to go.
Yeah, I had no idea Iowa had such a vibrant cycling community, and it's great.
A quick interruption to tell you this week's sponsor is Thirsty Pigs, a full-service mobile event company offering beer, wine, spirits, plus catering for any indoor or outdoor event. Check out more at thirstypigs.com. Now back to the show. Well, have you had a chance to analyze the members, like where most of them are from? I mean, you mentioned a ton were from Iowa, and what kind of riding they do?
Yeah, I haven't really made a spreadsheet or anything or
Sure.
found that kind of analytic, but I know there are members. Well, I think probably most members just watch, right? I
Yeah.
mean, it's 3,000 plus. And I know there are members in Australia, New Zealand. I know somebody joined from Vietnam. I know there are members in England and Wales and Scotland and Belgium, Romania, France, and Spain.
Wow.
But most of them are from the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
and really the center seems to be Iowa.
Well, we do have Ragbri. I talk about it almost every podcast where I mention Ragbri, but it is a pretty amazing bike ride that, there's over 15,000 people that do it each
Yeah,
day. So it is.
yeah,
And I think that because of that group ride or tour, the people that are attracted to your Facebook page are a social group. So they are like needing that, venting area. Like, oh my gosh, usually, this weekend I'd be out with 50 other people and we'd be cruising along a trail and stopping and meeting other people we know. So all of that's gone.
yeah. I don't know which came first, the Iowa cycling community or Ragbri, but they're both there now.
Yes, definitely. And, like I mentioned, we're recording this on April Fool's Day, but April is, for a lot of people, they kick off their biking season with, it's called 30 Days of Biking.
Hmm.
And I think it's based out of Minnesota, but it's something that you can just pledge to do. It's on your honor. There's a website called 30daysofbiking.com. And so it's an interesting dynamic because this year, when I do 30 days of biking, it's going to be almost solo rides by myself and
Yeah.
trying not to go find groups of people.
I did something like that last year here in Pittsburgh.
Mm-hmm.
Every New Year's Day, there's a morning ride, and a couple hundred crazy people go out on New Year's Day and ride here. And I've done that a few times. And last year, after that, I decided I was just going to ride every day for a while. I had a 2.5 week ride coming up from Maine to Cleveland in late May and June. I thought, well, this will be training for that, and I'll test my clothes out because there are going to be cold, rainy days on that
Mm-hmm.
route. So I'll test clothes out. And I just decided to ride every day, and I did from New Year's Day through Easter.
Wow.
And that was pretty much all by myself.
Yeah.
And since I decided I was going to definitely ride every day, sometimes it was at night, sometimes it was during the day, sometimes there was snow on the ground, sometimes there was ice,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it was raining, sometimes it was sunny, sometimes there was horizontal rain. There was all of that. And some days I'd think, okay, I'm going to get out, I'm going to ride the same route. It's my typical route. I've done this many times before. I'm not going to see anything different or unique. I would try to take pictures, and every few days I would make a Facebook post and share with people, and people enjoy watching that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, okay, I'm just going to go out. It's going to be boring, but something would happen, like full moon would rise over a still river, or one night there was a herd of deer that I encountered at dusk, and I ended up cycling in the midst of a herd of deer,
Oh my gosh.
stupidly racing them. But it was, I mean, and I guess if I were making a conscious choice and really thought about it, I wouldn't do that. But I was feeling really good, and I was using a bike that's really stable. And I decided to try to outrun the deer, which I eventually did, because they're only fast for a little while. But I was riding with deer right next to me and in front of me, which is not a good thing to do.
Wow.
Don't do this at home.
Wow.
But it made me think of like swimming with dolphins. It was just amazing.
Yeah.
They're kind of watching me out of the side of their eye, Yeah, it was not a smart thing to do. And again, if I just sat back and thought about it, I'd like to think I wouldn't do it. But it unfolded pretty quickly. I mean, I was on them in a couple seconds.
Yeah.
And it's just like, well, yeah, here we go.
And you lived through it, and now you have a great story to tell.
Yeah. No, I had my Norwegian commuter bike from when I lived in Norway. It weighs 40-some pounds with a steel Norwegian-made frame, has 2-inch wide tires with 26-inch wheels,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a pretty stable bike.
Yeah.
And I'm not a little guy.
Well, and that was my next question. What kind of bikes do you ride?
Well, that's the one I've had the longest. I lived in Norway. We lived as a family there, and I worked there for a year and a half. And I cycled to work. So I cycled in Norway in all seasons and got this Norwegian-made commuter bike. The first day I rode to work, I really didn't know the route. I didn't have a map. My Norwegian friend kind of gave me verbal directions, and it was miles that I had to go to get to the office. It was in February, so it was pretty cold. There was fresh snow. I had to go through woods and fields with a path, through farm lanes, and then come into a commercial area. And it was dark when I started. And the headlight was one of those ones with a generator.
Sure.
Yeah. So that was a pretty fun experience. But I remember cycling home in horizontal rain, and this was in a farm area with no trees. And it was a slight downhill, and rolling into the wind with this horizontal rain on this slight downhill, I couldn't coast downhill. It was so strong. But they have a saying in Norway that's stuck with me ever since, and is really helpful for cyclists too. There's no such thing as bad weather, just bad clothes.
Isn't that the truth?
Yeah.
That is
and Pittsburgh
so true.
people I found are really sturdy cyclists. I started cycling as an adult living in Houston, and that part of Texas is fairly flat, certainly flatter than here, and it's got more moderate weather too. And when I moved up here, and I moved up in midsummer, I did an MS ride, Cook Forest River ride, which is a beautiful one-day ride on a Saturday in September. But it can be a little chilly then in the early morning.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got up there, and it was cool rain early in the morning, and it was beautiful later. It goes along a river. It's a beautiful ride. But it was cool rain, and everybody was okay with this. And when I saw people cycling kind of in the other direction in cool rain, people were smiling and happy and laughing. And that's just the way they were in Norway, too. You could be out in cold rain, hiking in the hills, and people were just completely content. Americans might be complaining, whose idea was this? This is crazy. But if you have the right attitude, if you have the right clothes, it can be okay.
Yes, that's definitely the truth. Okay, so I would say living in Norway and getting to commute to work sounds like a great adventure in itself, but you have been on a ton of great bike adventures. So are there any that you'd be willing to share with us?
Yeah, I had decided in college that I wanted to ride across the country, and I did a lot of research with that. And I ended up latching on to a group called Bike the US for MS. It's a very small organization, and they collaborate with the National MS Society, but it's a smaller and different organization. Mm-hmm. They also support MS research and people with MS. They have a staff of 2 in Blacksburg, Virginia. They have 5 U.S. routes. They have 2 in the U.K. as well. There's Bike the UK for MS. And I decided from reading people's blogs and thinking about things that I really wanted to ride for charity. you can ride across the country and pay an outfitter, $15,000 or so, stay in a motel every night, or you can ride solo. And I have a friend who did that. I watched his blog. That there are a lot of good things. I've cycled as long as 10 days solo self-supported.
Mm-hmm.
And solo self-supported, you're on your own schedule. You can stop and go wherever you want. But the problem is you're on your own schedule and you do your own logistics.
Right.
So you have to figure out where you're going to be, to make things work for you. And when you meet people, you meet them and then they're gone. And it's great to meet them, but then they're gone.
Mm-hmm.
And when you cycle long distances and cross country with a group, and like the Bike the US for MS organization, typically the groups might be 15 or 20 people. After a couple weeks, you become like family. And so you have the experience of meeting new people along the way every day, but also being part of a group that is, like I say, becomes like family, becomes really close. And when you're cycling with a service-oriented group like them, the people tend to be service-oriented, and that's great too. Mm-hmm. So with them, you'll stay in churches or community centers, typically maybe campgrounds, or camp in the town park. So you end up sleeping on the ground or on the floor pretty much the whole time. But you know that you're doing that because you don't want to use the organization's money for anything other than to help people with MS.
Sure.
You're doing it as a service thing. And people, I'm 60 now, so people my age and older, typically they'll stay in B&Bs sometimes or get a room and share it. So that happens too. But being with service-oriented people is great. And then when you encounter people, I think it's a different experience. Well, I know this because I've cycled solo as well, self-supported. When you encounter people and you're cycling for charity, it's a bit of a different experience. How often do you have people hand you money? Strangers hand you cash,
sure,
right?
Yeah.
So that's happened many times to me and other people, as much as $100. And that's, people have handed me $100 more than once.
Wow.
We stopped west of Cleveland. There are these $1 million houses along the lakefront there. And 4 of us stopped in somebody's driveway to wait for a 5th person to catch up. And the homeowner came along in a car, needed to turn left to get into their driveway, and here we were standing in it. So we were in the way. They parked in the driveway. We were very apologetic. The guy was super nice. He gave us all the money in his wallet when he found out what we were doing.
Wow.
That's not unusual.
Yeah.
I've had truck drivers in a country road like you have a lot of in Iowa. I remember a truck driver in the Midwest just stopping his 18-wheeler on a really quiet road, just got out, wanted to talk, and gave us water. I've had people hand us water other times too. I guess I'd say one thing, I tell other people this, not just people in Iowa, but one of the best things about the Northern Tier route that I cycled with Bike the US for MS in 2017, Maine to Seattle, one of the best things about it, I think, was the people from about the west side of Cleveland all the way through North Dakota were just great. You're a stranger everywhere you go. And so the way people treat you as a stranger, is important. And people just routinely would treat strangers with kindness and respect.
Nice.
And in the East, it's not like that typically. Most people are just great, but there are a lot of places you'll run across a few people who will flip you off or yell at you. And that happens in Pittsburgh, and that happens lots of places.
Right.
But in the Midwest, there's just this really special, courteous behavior. And in the East, sometimes people tease about that. But I've come to see that as a national treasure, really.
And when you say you go on these cross-country tours, are you supported, or are you trying to carry all your gear with you?
No, as I said, I've cycled as much as 10 days solo self-supported. Cycled from here down to Blacksburg like that a couple of years ago and carried all my stuff. But on the Bike the US for MS rides, they have 2 vans and one pulls a trailer. So you have a cubby that's maybe 3 feet by 2 feet by 2 feet or something like that for your overnight gear. And you have another smaller cubby for food. And then the van that doesn't pull the trailer is the rest stop van. That has some plastic bins in. You have a slot, so you have a space to put your morning layers in. You can keep your midday food in there. Rest stop van typically rides out 20 miles, and then everybody catches up to it. Then it goes out another 20, and you catch up. So it's supported that way. You don't have to carry so much stuff, and they've been doing this for 13 or 14 years, and they kind of know what they're doing, I think.
Yeah, I was going to say they've got it nailed down, and it sounds like most of the money earned or the proceeds are going back to the reason that the event's happening.
Yeah, as much as they can. That's right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
People come up to you and tell you their stories. They'll see that the van says Bike the US for MS on it in big letters, or they'll see your jersey, and people will just stop and talk. People will drive up to us and roll down their window and say, I have MS, or another family member or friend, and tell you their story. I tried to experiment with fundraising a couple of years ago along the way. I went into a thrift shop. We love thrift shops. You have this teeny little cubby of clothing, and you may not have exactly the right stuff at the beginning, but the young people especially, love thrift shops.
Mm-hmm.
So I went into a thrift shop to get a clothing item, and I saw a stationary bike for sale for $4.99.
Oh my gosh.
So I got it. And the head route leader gave me permission to use it for fundraising. So in the same little strip shopping center, there was, I think it was a Kroger's grocery store. And this was in Kentucky, in a small town in Kentucky. So I got permission from the manager of the grocery store. I set this thing up near the door, and I just started pedaling on it with my Bike the US for MS jersey. And people gave money. And we did this several times in small towns.
That is awesome. That
Yeah.
is such a great idea.
And the first time that we did it, someone coming out of the grocery store, by the time they came along, it was more than just me. There were maybe 3 or 4 of us there. Somebody came out of the grocery store and they had MS. And here we were for them, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Not just theoretically, but really for them. Not just with a monetary donation, but actually spending our time and physical energy for this cause. And they cried.
Oh,
Wow. This was a total stranger coming out of the grocery store, encountered us, told us their story. We told them what we were doing. And yeah, it was that meaningful. And
mm-hmm.
that's not unusual. So solo self-supported, you just don't have those sorts of experiences.
Sure.
It's just great.
And does that organization still exist today?
Yes. That's what I was going to do this year. I'd planned a 6-month ride with them. I mentioned they have 5 routes.
Mm-hmm.
There's an Atlantic coast from Florida to Maine. That's in April and May. And then late May to early August, they have one that goes from Maine to Seattle, and then at the same time, Virginia to San Francisco. And the Maine to Seattle one, the support vehicles go from Seattle to San Diego.
Mm-hmm.
And then in September, October, they go from, there's a route that goes from San Diego back to Florida. So there are 4 routes around the perimeter and then 1 across the center. 2 years ago, when they added the Atlantic coast route, 2 people cycled the whole thing, the big loop. And there are a couple of route leaders who've done the whole thing too.
Do you know how many miles? How many miles that is?
Yeah. Yeah, it's 11,400.
Oh.
Yeah, 6 months. So I was going to do that this year. I'd been planning it for more than a year. But the first 2 legs of it now, because of the coronavirus, are canceled.
Right.
So the organization, they're coming up with some virtual activities. And I've kind of done a little bit of study of cycling fundraising, especially in the region where I live. And I'm pretty sure if you counted all the little fundraising bike rides for a particular trail or smaller causes, along with the really big ones like the Pan Mass Challenge for Cancer,
mm-hmm.
that raises tens of millions of dollars, if you add them all up, it's got to be 1,000 rides. And it's got to be way over $100 million for charities that they collect each year and generate for cancer and MS and all kinds of other charities. And, at least the first half of the year, that's a problem. And either everybody's going to cram their rides into the second half of the year, or they're going to have to find a different way to raise funds, or the causes, aren't going to be as well supported this year.
Right,
so
right.
People are just now trying to figure out what to do about all that, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And the Bike the US for MS people, they've come up with a stay home for MS. Instead of Bike the US, it's stay home for MS. They just rolled that out yesterday, and they're starting to have some virtual events. And I'm hopeful that we'll do some fundraising associated with those too, because it's needed.
Sure. And I have seen quite a few organizations, like you mentioned, that are doing virtual rides now, and it's novel, it's new, and I'm hoping that it does get some traction, because it is kind of fun to go for a bike ride and say, this is in honor of this person or this organization, but to somehow figure out how to raise money for that organization while you're doing it, that's a whole new battle.
Yeah.
A quick interruption to tell you this week's podcast is sponsored by Lizard Lips Lip Balm. These great lip balms contain natural ingredients, come in a variety of flavors, and you can choose certified organic or balms with sun protection. Check it out at lizardlips.net. Now back to the show.
Bikes and Beers is the first one that I've seen. They had lots of rides around the country that were in-person live bike rides as fundraisers before. And as far as I've seen, they were the first ones to come along with a well-formed virtual ride event. This is the day one of it, actually, April 1st.
Okay.
So we put that on the Facebook group. Not that we want to have it full of these charity rides, but it was the very first one.
Mm-hmm.
So I really wanted to reward their initiative, but also get people out there thinking about, this is the kind of thing that can be done for other things too. Mm-hmm. And I think it's Autism Speaks is the charity that they're supporting.
Okay. You're at the point now, you're retired, and you're hopefully doing some biking outside or on your trainer or at some level. I think I wrote on a Facebook page yesterday that even if you're like doing circles in your garage, at least you're on your bike and learning how to make tight corners, I guess. But like, where can you be found if you're not out biking? And I guess actually I should rephrase that, because you're probably on your computer a lot now that you are running a almost 4,000 member Facebook page.
Yeah, no, I had planned to cycle yesterday, but I did an interview like this, and I was learning to be a better administrator of that Facebook group.
Yeah.
So I actually didn't get to cycle at all. And I'm still hopeful for today.
Sure, yeah.
To be able to get out.
Yeah. Well, last question for you. Any advice you'd give someone who maybe they don't think they can or should be riding outside during this unsettling time?
Yeah. Well, it's really an individual decision. And some places in the world, it's not permitted.
Sure.
There are whole countries, I think, right now where it's not permitted. And it's going to be different from place to place and people's different situations. Mm-hmm. So it's definitely an individual choice. And if somebody feels like they shouldn't be, they probably shouldn't be.
Right.
Because we really want to be safe. We don't want to add any burden to the healthcare facilities at this time. Mm-hmm. So the people who are choosing to go out and ride, from what I see, almost all of them do it solo or with the family member. They don't go very far, mm-hmm. and they tend to go slower. Everybody, I think, is being especially careful. And many people, if they're lucky enough to have a trainer or a stationary bike at home, many people are doing that instead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you can, obviously do a bike ride just to do a bike ride, whether it is on your trainer or outside, but you can also do it socially with apps or websites like, Peloton or Zwift, where you can be interacting with other people and still you're not around people physically.
Yeah.
Good. Well, Fred, thank you so much for being on the podcast. And I'm assuming people who are listening to this are on Facebook, and they can go to Social Distance Cycling Club and become a member because it is a public page, correct?
Yeah, and I'm always looking for new ideas to interact. We have a Strava group just because somebody had the idea to have one.
Oh, okay.
This weekend, we're going to try to do a cycling relay cycle around the world, see how many miles we collectively rack up and whether it's enough to go around the world. Mention the Bikes and Beers thing. There was a Can't Get Dropped indoor ride with Zoom today as an experiment. We've had people serve as virtual ride leaders. And when they've had themes, that's been a pretty fun thing. So we're open to suggestions. Somebody suggested a T-shirt, and they were not busy with other work right now, so really could use some work. And I think they've gotten orders for more than 200 T-shirts already. So I'm open to ideas if people have ideas for things to do that can help us get through this together.
Yeah, I have 2 T-shirts that I've ordered, so they're on their way to me, which should be fun. And they literally say Social Distance Cycling Club on the shirt. They're really cool. So it sounds like if you go to your Facebook page, you'll see different activities and things that you can do socially from the comfort of your own home. Yeah.
One other thing I might mention, this weekend there's a really special activity. A really great bike film festival was planned in May. They've been doing it for many years in Portland. Mm-hmm. And then you can hire the compilations of short films they put together and do your own film festival in your own city. And we were going to use a couple of those in Pittsburgh, but they can't have it in May. Maybe they'll have it in September. And instead, for the first time ever, they're going to do an online festival. It's
Oh,
part films, part music, and part other things, but it's on Saturday. And I definitely plan to participate. I think it's going to be an interesting thing to see. I think it's called Global Bike Festival, and it's put on by Filmed by Bike, which is in Portland.
cool. Okay, so check out Films by Bike or Global Bike Festival. I'm sure if you Google either of those, you'll find the connection.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Fred.
All right. Thank you for the opportunity.
Well, that's it for this week. A big thanks to Fred for taking the time to chat and also for taking the leap to create the Facebook page called Social Distance Cycling Club. He mentioned that there are now t-shirts available for purchase. You can go to blackbisonoutfitters.com to place your order. Also, if you're listening to this podcast episode before April 4th, 2020, you can go check out the online event Fred mentioned being put on by a nonprofit group called Filmed by Bike. It's called the Global Bike Festival, and the cost is around $12. Go to filmedbybike.org to get more info. I'll be putting this info along with a bunch more links in the show notes, so please take a look. And of course, email me your topics or names of cyclists you find interesting at MurphologyPodcast@gmail.com. Be sure to check out MurphologyPodcast.com to find all kinds of great info. I will leave you with this quote from the Unwritten Book of Murphology. This quote is from Jesse Jackson. At the end of the day, we must go forward with hope and not backward by fear and division. Think about it.